Reading a sports article engages the same part of your brain that you use to move around and flail those weird meaty little limbs of yours. It also happens when you listen to someone talk about sports and when you watch an actual game. And this is important because it upheavals a popular belief for which the adult brain is sort of fixed in how it processes information. Because experienced viewers of a sport rely on a specific area of the brain for faster and more efficient processing compared to novice viewers. And the bigger mystery is that we are actually not very sure about what each of those areas involved actually does. So, this is your motor cortex. It's symmetrical for the two halves of your brain. It's what you use to walk, run, smile, and jerk off. And when you compare experienced viewers with noobs, you will notice that the former rely a lot more on their premotor area, whereas the miserable novices actually use the primary motor area a lot more. But there is a little asymmetry between the two halves of the brain, and we'll actually see that in a moment. For decades, we actually believed that these two parts of their brain I am having a stroke. We actually believed that these two parts of the brain formed a unique area that managed a single specific goal, being a unique center of motion for your crusty limbs. This belief was very strong during the 20th century until someone pointed out that there were some obvious differences between the kinds of neurons present in the two areas. And that was also boosted by an incredible study from 1992 showing that a handful of shit-flailing monkeys in a laboratory would have neuron activation anytime they observed someone perform a movement. And that activation would occur only in the premotor cortex. We started to realize that this part of the brain maybe is used both to move a person's body and to interpret other people's movements. So keep this area in mind because it's at the center of the reason why you're able to understand so quickly the movements of Ragnar Lothbrok chasing terrified Catholics. The cherry on top was found at the end of an atrocious war between nerds playing with monkeys. You see, when we believed this to be a uniform motor cortex, we believed that this area, now known as the primary motor cortex, served as the main connection point between the brain's decisions and the body's movements. The idea was that various parts of the motor cortex would compute and process whatever movement it is that was required, and the primary area would be the end stage of the computation, receiving the movement instructions and translating them into electrical impulses which would make you move with grace and precision. But it turns out that the premotor area I mentioned before also has a direct access to your body's muscles. So basically this hierarchical view of how the motor cortex works completely fell apart. And this messy revelation was sort of boosted by the discovery of mirror neurons. They are a set of neurons in the premotor area that activate both when you watch someone perform a movement and when you also perform that same movement yourself. It took me 2 hours to understand this because I'm brain dead. And this works with words too. Reading or hearing about Mbappe executing the referee because he was just doing his job triggers in your brain the exact same neurons you would use to actually lift your arm and take aim at an innocent's head. Now, is this the point of the video? Absolutely not. And here enters this wacky study. Now, before you call me a master masturbator, I have to disclose that this was actually a study conducted on hockey players and hockey viewers. But given everything else that I mentioned, and the fact that this study is based off of another study that also included football viewers, it is very sensible to imagine that this would work for any complex tactical sport. It would actually kind of be really weird if it only worked exclusively for hockey and nothing else. The study analyzed the cerebral activity of 3 kinds of people: professional hockey players, experienced hockey viewers, and casual noobs hockey viewers. And the last 2 categories are gonna get your toes wagging like crazy. The novices had relatively higher activity in the primary motor cortex, whereas the seasoned viewers had a relatively higher activity in the premotor area of the brain. And it all beautifully ties to our current understanding of the two. The primary area is usually engaged in performing sequence of actions that are unfamiliar to us, the kinds of things that require step-by-step focus, whereas the premotor area is more concerned with the execution of familiar sets of movements. It's kind of like the execution of higher level plans. I tricked into learning something with football. And this disparity in the brain correlated to response time in processing sports-related stimuli. And even cooler is that the primary motor activity seemed to change symmetrically, across the 2 halves of the brain, whereas the change in the premotor area only affected the left side. And that has complex causes, tied to the idea that the brain's not perfectly symmetrical, that the 2 opposing parts can have different purposes, and that's super complex. So by employing a disgustingly lazy and post TikTok mentality, watching the World Cup can be seen as a productive activity because you are training your motor cortex to work more efficiently. That is where we are now. Anything that's not doom scrolling is a good thing. I am addicted to
AI thirst traps.